Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is CNN superstar Jeff Toobin and also the best-selling author Jeff Toobin. Thank you for being here.
It's great to be in Tulsa.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, you really do have rock star status for me because I'm a huge CNN junkie.
Well, you know, it's in the current media environment, it's good to have a number of ways to expose yourself. I guess that's not an appropriate way to describe myself, but what I mean is, you know, to write for the New Yorker, to be on CNN, to write books, it's nice to be able to do different things.
Well, sure, and you've got the best of a lot of worlds. But I was particularly intrigued during the election year when President Obama, then Barack Obama, made the announcement that he was seeking the presidency. How did you rate his chances?
Well, you know, I think even at the beginning, it seemed like this was a very plausible candidacy. You start with the idea that going into 2008, it looked like a very Democratic year. Mm-hmm. So the Democratic nomination was definitely going to mean something. Whoever the Democratic nominee was obviously going to have a very good chance, given the disenchantment with Bush, the economy, which in 2007 wasn't as bad as it would get in 2008, discontent about the Iraq War. So you start with that. Obama was very much an unknown quantity, but there was a lot, obviously, of potential there. There were three major candidates. There was Hillary Clinton, there was John Edwards, and there was Barack Obama. I don't usually think of myself as very prescient. I never thought John Edwards had much of a chance. I even before the whole scandal thing, he never seemed to have either the gravitas or the issues pointing his way that would lead him to be a serious candidate. So I did see from the beginning it was going to be an Obama-Hillary Clinton contest. Hillary Clinton is a very formidable candidate. I think she ran a good campaign. It was very close between them. I certainly thought that she was the front runner. If I had to bet on the day that Barack Obama announced who was going to be the nominee, I certainly would have said Hillary Clinton. But the message of change resonated not just with Democrats versus Republicans, it resonated within the Democratic Party itself, that Obama was such a different face, and you know, Hillary Clinton had been around a long time. Plus, just to say the obvious, Barack Obama ran an absolutely brilliant campaign. He showed himself to people as a plausible candidate, which is something that is very hard to do. You know, we talk about campaigns as if, you know, anybody can just sort of step in and do it. It's very hard to run for office. And, you know, if you recall, there was all this excitement for Fred Thompson was going to run for president, and you know, on paper he looked pretty good, but he was a lousy candidate. Barack Obama was not a lousy candidate.
What do you point to as the pivotal moments in that campaign? Certainly, Jeremiah Wright issue was one of them.
Let's see, boy, it suddenly seems like a long time ago.
It does, doesn't it?
I think, boy, what were the pivotal moments of the campaign? I guess. You know, it's funny. Jeremiah Wright, I don't think would have jumped out at me. I think the Iowa caucuses were really was the big moment, because here you had a state overwhelmingly white, in the middle of the country, not a state anyone could dismiss as sort of unrepresentative of the country as a whole. When Obama came in and won that, albeit by a very small margin over both Clinton and Edwards, he suddenly became a very plausible candidate. And a lot of liberals who might have not voted for Obama on the grounds that he simply would have been a sacrificial lamb, didn't have a chance, wouldn't be embraced by white voters, said, you know, this guy could really do it. And I think that was really the turning point. Now remember, a week later, Hillary Clinton won the New Hampshire primary, so it was hardly a done deal at that point, but that, I would say, was the turning point.
How important was Ted Kennedy's endorsement?
With all due respect to Ted Kennedy, not that important, I think. If you recall, he endorsed Obama on the eve of Super Tuesday. And two of the big primaries on Super Tuesday were Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy's home state, and California, where Ted Kennedy and Caroline Kennedy and Maria Shriver campaigned very extensively for Barack Obama. And what happened in those two states? Hillary Clinton won both of them. So, I think it was part of his overall momentum. It showed how serious he was as a candidate, but I don't think it made that much of a difference.
How did you see Obama grow during the course of the campaign?
Well, I remember, I don't know Obama well personally, but I do know him a little bit. And after there was a campaign, there was a debate in Nevada, well before the Nevada caucuses, and it was one of the few times that all the candidates were together. I think this was still in 2007. And on the air, I said the debate looked like Gladys Knight and the Pips, that you had this really commanding figure and everybody else sort of looked like a background singer. And I happened to see Obama the next day, and he gave me a little grief about that. He had heard that. And I think running for president is a skill like any other skill, and you can get better at it as you do more of it, or you can get worse or stay the same. And Obama really grew. I think if you look at his speech at the night he lost the New Hampshire primary, which later became famous because it's the speech that they used as the basis for the video "Yes We Can" with that will.i.am did. That's a pretty great speech, and it was brilliantly written and brilliantly delivered. And that was not a speech that he could have given in 2007 because he just wasn't as good a candidate. So I think he just got better.
How did the country grow over the course of the campaign?
Well, I think like everything else, repetition gets familiar. And if you had asked people, I think people did ask in 2007, could the nation elect an African American president? You probably would have. I don't remember what the polls were, but they were fairly negative. But once someone is out there long enough and familiar enough to people, and as a credible person, week after week, month after month, that becomes less of an issue. So I think that just the sheer repetition made a big difference.
What was it like for you as a journalist on election night? Was that one of your great all-time newsroom moments?
One of the it's funny, Gloria Borger and I sat next to each other all through the primaries, and it got so crazy because we really thought, remember, everything looks so obvious in retrospect. The whole system was set up so that the nomination would be decided by Super Tuesday in February. And what became increasingly clear is that it wouldn't be decided. Yeah. And so night after night, we primaries that were really thought to be totally irrelevant, Texas, Pennsylvania, Ohio, turned out to be and in many respects, I think those nights were more exciting because by the time we got to November, it was just a foregone conclusion, I think, that Obama was going to win. So there wasn't really the drama, the uncertainty that you had in many of those primary nights.
We're 9 months into Obama's presidency now, and your colleague, David Gergen, who's a fan of Obama, said very respectfully that he wonders if he's not taking on too much all at once. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't agree with that. I think the country has big challenges. That's a politician's word. Politicians never talk about problems. They always talk about challenges. I'm not a politician. The country has big problems. And I don't think you can be president at this moment and say, well, I'm just not going to deal with some of these challenges, problems. So I think, look, he is taking on a lot, but healthcare is so by far the number one priority, that it really is, that he has established a hierarchy of priorities. This is number one. And the fact that he's also trying to do climate change and revive the economy, I think, first of all, if you look at climate change in the context of the history of this planet, you can't continue to ignore it. Now, I think he's got a long way to go even to get this minor bill passed, but the economy is the president's number one job always, and healthcare is the defining Democratic, capital D, challenge of the last two generations. And, what's the point of getting elected if you don't try to do something?
Right. Obama followed Abraham Lincoln's example by appointing his rival, Hillary Clinton, to the cabinet. How effective do you think she's been so far as Secretary of State?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton has benefited from the fact that this has been an intensely domestically oriented 9 months. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That she has had a good, reasonable period of time to get used to being Secretary of State in relative media privacy. The honest answer is, I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows what her effect has been on American foreign policy yet, because there have not been the crises mm-hmm. that challenge a foreign policy leadership team, and there also have not been the steps forward that she can point to as accomplishments yet. Will there be a Middle East peace deal? Will there be some sort of arrangement with Iran that stops their development of nuclear weapons and allows them to return to the family of nations? What's going to happen between Pakistan and Afghanistan? All of those, I think, in any fair sense, you have to give her and the administration a grade of incomplete. Let's see in a year if there's any progress.
Throughout the campaign, there were charges that the media had a gender bias. Was there one?
Well, I think the news media has changed a lot in recent years, and it's impossible to generalize about something called the news media. Look at our friends at MSNBC. Mm-hmm. MSNBC mm-hmm. has decided to rebrand itself as the liberal Fox. As Fox is the conservative network, MSNBC is the liberal network. Now, I don't think either of those paths you can say is wrong, but it's a choice. CNN has not chosen to mm-hmm. go that route. It's a departure from the American journalistic tradition. It's not something new, but think about England, where Rupert Murdoch comes. Yeah. He comes from Australia, but he spent a lot of time in England. In England, every newspaper is known for its political orientation. The Telegraph is the Tory paper. The Guardian yep. is the Labour paper. That doesn't mean they're bad newspapers, but there's a political slant to the coverage, and everybody acknowledges that. Murdoch brought that to the United States, and Fox became the conservative network. MSNBC, I think, made what looks like a good business decision, at least in the short term, to go the other way. I think it's unclear whether that's a viable long-term strategy in a country where objectivity is a word that I don't care for much. I prefer the word fairness. But in a world where we sort of rely on our news media outlets to be more or less in the center. But that maybe that's going to change. I just don't know.
How surprised were you by McCain's choice of Sarah Palin as a running mate?
Well, I was very surprised. I mean,
a lot of people
what's
were.
the word? Yeah, and I think. Well, John McCain lost the election for a lot of reasons, mm-hmm. and I don't think, choosing Tim Pawlenty or some of the other finalists would have made much of a difference. But I think it wound up being both a political negative for McCain, in the sense that it lost him more votes than it got him. But I also think it was it's not going to look good on John McCain's lifelong resume to have done this.
Speaks to judgment, doesn't it?
It was. I feel comfortable in saying a truly irresponsible and wrong decision by John McCain, because I'll put my cards on the table here. I think Sarah Palin was manifestly unqualified to be vice president of the United States, and proved that throughout the campaign, proved it after the campaign, and that is not there are very few things that presidential candidates have to do in terms of decisions they have to make. That decision showed a true lack of judgment on John McCain's part.
As involved as you were in the 2008 campaign, you were also just as involved in the 2000 campaign. I mean, talk about controversy there.
Right.
We had the presidency decided in.
I wrote a book about it.
I know you did. And constitutionally speaking, what's going to be the lasting impact of that decision by the court? Now, not in terms of the president. I mean, we know what that impact was, but in terms of precedent.
Well, the interesting thing about Bush v. Gore, well, there are many interesting things, is it as a decision, it does not seem to have had a precedent. It has not become an important precedent of the court. In 1954, the court said you can't have segregated public schools anymore, and it took a long time, but the country didn't have segregated public schools after Brown v. Board of Education. So there's a decision you can say had a major effect. Roe v. Wade, states can't ban abortions. States can't ban abortions. I mean, that is a real effect. So what's the effect of Bush v. Gore in terms of the law? Probably not much. And interestingly, what a lot of people thought at the time was that it would damage the court's credibility, status in the country among the many, many people who disagreed with it. And I think that didn't happen. And certainly as a supporter and admirer of the court, I'm glad that didn't happen. Personally, I disagreed with Bush v. Gore. I thought it was incorrectly decided. But I also retain my respect for the institution, and I think most people did as well.
You've written a best-selling book, The Nine, Inside the Secret World of the Supreme Court. A friend of mine's an attorney, Jeffrey. He read this book. He said, this is just a marvelous book. I mean, you've just gotten, across the board, great reviews for it. Give us some glimpses into this secret world.
Well, one of my favorite stories from the book is, the justices themselves know that they are important and powerful, but no one knows who they are. I mean, no one literally knows who they are. And one of the funny aspects of this is that Stephen Breyer and David Souter have frequently been mistaken for each other for years. They look at them and they say, and one time not too long ago, Justice Souter, as he often did, now retired, would drive from his home in Washington to his home in New Hampshire, and he stopped to get something to eat in a little restaurant in Massachusetts. So he's sitting there, and a couple comes up to him, and the guy says, I know you. You're on the Supreme Court, right? He says, yes. He says, you're Stephen Breyer, right? And Souter didn't want to embarrass the fellow in front of his wife, so he says, yes, I'm Stephen Breyer. And they chat for a little while, and then the guy says, so Justice Breyer, what's the best thing about being on the Supreme Court? He thought for a minute, and he said, I'd have to say it's the privilege of serving with David Souter. Now, how can you not love a guy like that and love an institution where that's still possible? So I guess why The Nine struck a responsive chord is that what I tried to do was explore the very important issues in front of the court, but also talk about who these people are, what their personalities are like, how they interact, and that's, I think, why I had some good luck with it.
What's your quick take on former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor?
Well, quick take, the most important woman in American history, period.
Wow.
I think in terms of the exercise she influenced on that court for so long as the swing vote, as the person who decided the outcome of so many important issues, saved affirmative action. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, her vote, 5-4 in the University of Michigan Law School case saved affirmative action. She saved abortion rights in the Casey case in 1992. Again, good or bad, that's up to other people. She made George Bush president in Bush v. Gore. Just the magnitude of that contribution was fascinating to me. And the thing about her, which I think was so interesting, is she was the only former elected official on the court. Throughout the court's history, there have been a lot of former elected officials. Whether Earl Warren, who was governor of California, Hugo Black, who was a senator from Alabama. During most of O'Connor's tenure, she was the only one who was an elected official in a previous life. And I think that really helped her form her ideas about law, because she kept very close in her rulings to where most of the American people were. She was a centrist in the truest sense of the word. She thought that abortion shouldn't be banned, but there should be restrictions on it. She thought affirmative action should survive, but there shouldn't be quotas. She really was about where most Americans were, and you can see that.
Clarence Thomas.
Wow, that's why I had good material to work with. Thomas is the single most popular member of the court, most liked by all his colleagues, the funniest court. In the very silent marble corridors of the court, you can often hear Thomas's booming laugh. He's the only justice who knows the names of the security guards and the people who work in the cafeteria. At the same time, the most angry justice, still furious about how he was treated in his confirmation hearings in 1991, a long time ago. Furious with liberals, hates the news media. By far the most conservative justice. Not too long ago, I was at an event where Justice Scalia was asked, well, how would you compare your judicial philosophy to Justice Thomas's? Interesting question. And he talked for a while, and then he said, look, I'm an originalist, but I'm not a nut. And I think that kind of sums up some of the differences between them. So he's a paradoxical, very interesting figure.
Before we went on camera, you told me an interesting experience you've had, that you're asked as often about the O.J. trial as you are about the presidential campaign.
Well, not anymore. But the point I was making was how passionate people were about the 2000 election. And in my journalistic career, the only comparably exciting event was the O.J. trial. It was the case. It was a time when, because I was in the courtroom every day, people just couldn't wait to talk to me about it, in the same way that they couldn't wait to talk to me about the 2008 campaign, in a way that they didn't want to talk about the 2004 campaign. I mean, people were interested, but the Kerry Bush race was just not the kind of story that captured people. They didn't care that much about the Timothy McVeigh case, a story obviously very important to people in Oklahoma, but not one that captured the national imagination. The only close, Monica Lewinsky and Bill Clinton in the late 90s, still, as bizarre and interesting as that story was, people weren't as interested in that as they were in the 2008 campaign and the O.J. case.
Wow. Did Judge Ito make a terrible mistake by allowing cameras in the courtroom?
No, I don't think that was the problem. I remain a supporter of cameras in the courtroom. I think cameras in the courtroom are a good thing. Judge Ito made a mistake by not doing a good job.
We all got to see it.
Yes, and the tragedy of Judge Ito is that before the O.J. case, he was known as an excellent judge. Since the O.J. case, from everything I've heard, he remains an excellent judge. But in the crucible of that kind of public attention, he let it get to his head. He didn't cut it off. He didn't limit the trial the way a judge should. And he unfortunately damaged the cause of cameras in the courtroom, which I think is a good cause, and I think is an important window into a big part of our government, and it shouldn't be in effect secret and visible only to the people who might show up on a given day. So I'm not going to blame cameras in the courtroom. I'm going to blame him.
You broke the story that the defense team for Simpson was planning to implicate Mark Furman. What sort of ethical considerations do you have to weigh before making that news public?
Well, I guess the first thing you always start with as a journalist is, is it true? But that's only the first question. Now, there you had, just to refresh people's memory, I'm pleased that you asked about that. It's getting a little dated, that story, but but the idea was, if people remember, was Mark Furman was the Los Angeles police detective who discovered a bloody glove at O.J.'s house, and the defense team was planned, that was well before the trial, to say that Furman was a racist and that he planted the glove to frame Simpson out of racial animus or something like that. And so the question was, do you report it? Now, clearly in my reporting, I learned that it was true. They were going to blame him, and there was this history that Furman had, which I discovered basically on my own, of racially inflammatory behavior. He had tried to get a pension on the grounds that he was disabled by his racial hostility to black people. So the question is, do you report that? Well, it was true. And then the second question is, is it newsworthy and fair? And I thought it was.
Well, certainly I was riveted to that as well. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for taking time out to be with us today. I'll be watching you on CNN.
Good, thanks.
Thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.